All right, it's another film study. It's been a while. We had to take a little break after the way the season ended and evaluate that. Now we get to look at the roster as a whole and kind of look forward from this point. So we're going to do our roster evaluation. Ken McKusick, how you doing?
Life's good, Josh. How about you?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. There's really just one guest that we want every year for the roster evaluation. There's not really an option. It's always whenever Brian is available. So Brian McFarland, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys, for having me on, guys. It's always fun, always informative.
Informative is a two-way street here, at least, with most of the traffic coming in this direction. We appreciate that, Brian. Great look ahead, I think, to what we've got. I always appreciate having you on, going over the roster and value relative to cap with you. All right, so we usually break down the roster in a similar manner each time, but we'll start with the young producers. We'll talk about the defensive side of the ball first, if that's okay with you, Brian?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So these are the first group is players on their first contract who are already largely starting and playing fairly well, at least. I had trouble with that with one player in this group, but they're significant starters or rotational players on the team in their on their first contract. And these are the guys who help you beat the salary cap.
Absolutely. I mean, those are, that's your cheap labor. Although one of them got a bump up based on playing time, we figured out this week. But I mean, these are the guys. I mean, this is what the Ravens have always done. Those young guys, you can balance out having your Ray Lewis's and your Joe Flacco's, your top of the market deals, Ronnie Stanley's now, when you have young guys who are producing.
All right. I'm interested to hear who that guy is, but we'll go through them in order here. And I just have them alphabetically, not trying to be tricky about who's more important than who. But Deshaun Elliott, the first name on the list, one of the most interesting names this offseason, I think. After 2 injury-filled years, played well at free safety. I think as the year wore on, we saw more of that legitimate free safety range. And
he's the one. So there is the thing called the proven performance escalator. We knew, I shouldn't say I should have known, but I didn't pay attention. But we knew it happened for Andrews, we knew it happened for Bozeman, and we knew it happened for Orlando Brown. Because I'd never even looked at the numbers on Elliott, because he played, 40 snaps in the first 2 years. He played, something like 98% of the snaps. Overall, because they played more defensive snaps this year, that got him over the 35%. So that saw his $910,000 salary go up to $2.183 million. So he earned it, and he, but that's. That was kind of a surprise because, again, the numbers, you figured hardly plays the first 2 seasons. You're not going to go over 35%, but it was just the way the snaps, I guess last year they were very low on snaps compared to compared to this year.
Now, is that graded at all? Meaning if he had played 33% of the snaps, would he have gotten a portion of that?
No. You got to get over 30. All or nothing. Yeah.
So the Ravens could have hosed him out of it by, say, not letting him play the second half of the Cincinnati game. That might have been enough.
Correct. Great Twitter follow. Yoshi actually figured out the snap. It was sometime in the third quarter of the Cincinnati game that snap would have occurred. And basically, the proven performance escalator is set up because, 2 CBAs ago now, they got rid of, all rookies have 4-year contracts. Used to be late round rookies had 3 years, and then you'd have the restricted free agent year, which was a bump up in salary. So this is basically that bump up in salary that, they don't get screwed, so to speak, because of the new rookie scale, that they can still make that back up.
Well, now, one of my hopes with Elliott this offseason was that he would be in line to get an early extension, which is going to be more difficult this year because of available cap space, and it's probably going to be more difficult this year because of what teams may project future cap to be in the next couple of years, as opposed to players and agents, what they may think it should be. Elliott, along with Bozeman and Averett, were the three guys who I thought are on the inexpensive side, where there's a lot of divisible benefit potentially on the table between those groups. Can you talk a little bit about that and why it might or might not make sense for Elliott for a deal, say, 3 years in the $7-8 million range?
Well, I mean, if you look at, probably this time last year, Chuck Clark got his, if I remember correctly. And you were, it might have been a couple days after we did this episode, if I feel like it was. So, I mean, that's the same kind of thing. And maybe this escalator helps him get that extension, because now if it does add a little bit to his cap number, you're not adding $2 or $3 million this year, because of the way they would structure it. You're only adding 1 or 2, and maybe not even that much. They're going to be structuring contracts this year, going to be backloaded, or at least not as backloaded as they used to be, but certainly very low first-year cap numbers, and then much higher, so that they could still be flat in structure, but it'll just be flat after this year. So, I mean, they could do that with with what he's making now. They could probably make that work. And coming off, he may. I didn't expect Clark to take it. They obviously, and I think it was better than the numbers we had projected. So maybe that is something they can work out with Elliott, especially coming off of, he was injured 2 years. So, he especially looks at it like, if I get injured next year, I lose out on my payday. So why don't I take it now? And on it, like Clark, a 2 or 3 year deal, or a 3 year deal, I think Clark's was. So he's a free agent again when the money's back in the market, so he can get paid some now, maybe give up some now, but ideally make it up when the market's flush again.
And a 3-year deal, including his 3rd, 4th, and 5th seasons, seems to be about a perfect extension. In Clark, they got it to 4, but for a lot of players, it seems like in this environment, a 3-year deal might be about perfect.
Yeah, I think so. And that way, if next year's the obviously going to be the down year with the cap, but if the following year should bump up, it's the question: will it bump up where it would have been without the pandemic, or whether it's going to bump up, at a normal rate, quote unquote, which would still be 10 or 15 million under where it should be. So that it may take now obviously TV deal will be huge, but we obviously got to get everything that's going on in the world behind us before that's even possible.
Got to get fans in the stands too. It's too significant a portion of total revenue, even with a new TV deal. Let's continue on here, because we need to kind of move. Second young producer on my list is Justin Madubuike. Not really an issue putting him on the list. Played terrifically in the second half. This is his first time jumping to the list. Not only did he play well, he played more snaps than he had in the first half. Ended up playing 25% of the snaps for the whole year. I think a fine rookie year. And what's really important about him is he makes the defensive line younger, and that's a place where the Ravens really need it. Yeah,
absolutely. He was a guy I really liked in the draft, and I'm not patting myself on the back, because there are plenty of guys I liked that turned out to be terrible. So, but I did get him right. So, and he obviously played well. The fact that he fell through, I mean, there were some talking about him as a late first round pick. The fact that he fell into the 3rd,
71.
Yeah, and then obviously came on a little slowly, but a lot of rookies did, because they didn't have a real full training camp and OTAs and stuff like that. So, and the reports on him where he's got a lot of ability to eventually, and hopefully, a full off season here, be able to push that pocket a little more up the middle.
Oh yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, obviously, that's where you get quarterbacks off their game, when you get somebody in their face, and it's kind of what we've been lacking for a while.
Yeah, I think they have it now with Campbell, with what Wolf gives them in terms of stunt. But Madubuike is that violent hands, one-on-one 3-tech winner that the Ravens have really needed, and he's an exceptional talent, and pushing the pocket. Yeah, that's great. I mean, we got it from Permelo McPhee at one point, but what we get from Madubuike now is a lot of one-on-one wins, and those are hard to find. But he had 5 pressures in one of the games I scored. All 5 were one-on-one wins. They weren't something where somebody else created a pressure and he stunted, or there was any kind of a level 2 deal going on. It was him winning one-on-one. So I was real impressed by that. Let's move on to one of the difficult stories of this year. And I had a lot of trouble deciding whether this guy belongs in developmental or young producer, but eventually I put him in young producer because of the snaps played largely. Patrick Queen, not the greatest rookie year, certainly flashed. We certainly hope for more, but he is where he is, and he's starting for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, I mean he's gonna be there unless the wheels really come off the cart, so to speak. But yeah, I mean he, as you said, he flashed. I mean, some plays, some games he was exceptional, and then others, obviously, and pass coverage and seemingly being out of position and maybe letting his eyes do a little too much. Maybe, and just pulling them one direction or the other, and not sticking to his assignments perhaps. But yeah, I mean, again, hopefully that's. I mean, the story about him coming out was that he never made the same mistake twice. I'm not sure if that really held this year, but hopefully that's something again with an off season and time. Time in the film room and things like that, because it's different. As good as Alabama is, it's different than playing against Alabama in the NFL. So. You've got all kinds of multiple things you just don't see in college.
In a way, I wish it were only the coverage stuff, because I think he did a little better in the second half on that. But more than that, I think he's got a tackling issue, and he had a very high missed tackle percentage. It was up there towards the top of the entire NFL, and there's several different sites for this. Whether you take PFF or Pro Football Reference, you're going to see he has one of the highest numbers in the entire leagues. Misses about every sixth tackle. That's way too much for a linebacker. It's really too much for a safety to miss that much, and they are allowed to miss a slightly higher rate, or to be average, they'll miss a few more. But that's the real problem. If his problems are all coverage, I'd say work on the film, figure out the route combinations. He'll eventually figure out what's going on behind him and be able to do the things. But as a tackler, he needs positional coaching. He needs time with a Singletary or a Lewis to try and learn out how to tackle well, where his instinctive ability and his speed and whatnot got him by at college. All right, that's the top group. We'll move on to the developmental group. This to me is always the most interesting group every year. 5 defensive players on this list, which is kind of tight. Ravens have an older defense. They don't have a lot of young producers. They don't have a lot of developmental, which is bad. They need to draft some and restock on these players. But number one is an interesting guy that I think also could be a extension possibility, is Anthony Averett.
Yeah, I mean, he, obviously health has been an issue with him as well, but he seemingly, towards the end of the year when he was healthy, seemed to play pretty well. I mean, Harbaugh doesn't generally say anything bad about people, but he seemed to be, now whether he was just trying to build up his confidence, but he seemed to be pretty effusive about him, yeah, I mean, he's a guy, again, as you mentioned, an extension. I don't know. Well, I mean, you've got a lot of guys under contract right now at cornerback. So, but yeah, I mean, he's certainly a guy. I mean, DeCosta's talked about. I want to get my guys signed. As we go further through the list, some of the guys that are going to be free agents, a lot of guys looking at 1-year deals just to get through the next year, and then hopefully hit the market when it's flush. So, kind of like we said with Elliott, Averett could certainly be a guy that would fit into that category. What Peters has next year and the year after. So, obviously Humphrey's going to be here for a long time. So, and Smith is obviously not going to be here much longer. So, I guess
we keep saying that every year.
Right, but I mean, yeah. So, I mean, so that's certainly a possibility. But he may be a guy that on his own just wants to wait and see before he locks himself behind these guys at this point.
Right. I think the way that the Ravens would probably try and sell this to him, and I think honestly the way the situation is Smith will likely only be here for 1 more year. So he's got the 4th cornerback job locked up as soon as Smith is gone. And those are the 2 extra years that the Ravens would want him for. And honestly, Peters is playing for his 3rd year in 2021. So whether or not he stays with the team in 2022 will be a function of what happens this year. So, he'll be a big cap nut to swallow in 2022, and the Ravens may decide, hey, as good as he is, we have to move on. We've got Anthony Averett. Maybe we've got this other young cornerback, whoever that is, and we're prepared to make the move. Other thing is Tavon Young and his health issues, and we're going to get to that a little later. I think make Averett an important fifth corner for the Ravens, and it gives them a lot of depth at the position that they had needed every bit of it and more this year.
Seems like every year. I mean, even the years you're like, we are so deep, we're never going to have those issues, and it makes it, it's scary when you think when they weren't deep and what they, 2007 was it? I think was the year.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
just terrible.
Yeah.
And was that the Big Ben game where they had like 5 passing touchdowns at half, and that disaster. So yeah, those kind of nightmares still hold in my head for sure.
Yeah, mine too. The 2007 I often refer to as the secondary of dying men. Out of that Gone with the Wind shot where they take the streets of Atlanta, where you just see her walking by and there's a dead man, and then they pull out and you realize it's a street full of all dying men. So it was like that in terms of the secondary, not to over dramatize it. The second player on our developmental list is Chris Board. Obviously significantly up in terms of his number of snaps, played this proxy dime back role where he was effectively on the field in situations where the Ravens would otherwise have had a safety playing that dime back role. And that was really all he played. He didn't really play any pure inside linebacker snaps, or not very many anyway. Contributed a little bit as a pass rusher, really not at all in terms of coverage. He had a little bit of ability to cover players on a wheel route, but his other ability and his recognition of what's going on behind him still very poor. In terms of Board, interesting player because he's a special teams player who also contributes some on defense.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be an interesting case with the tight cap because he's a restricted free agent, which means undrafted, which means just being able to match an offer would be $2.133 million. So I don't see him getting that.
No.
So he's a guy that, whether it's, the Anthony Levine kind of deal where it's a 2-year deal. I've done that with a few guys when they came up for their restricted free agent. So instead of you get him for 2.5 over the 2 years as opposed to 2.1 over 1 or something like that. I mean, he's certainly a guy that the Ravens might just be the ones who would pay him more than anybody else, because I doubt he's going to get more than the minimum somewhere else. So that's 910. So they could give him a little more, and he can hang around. And again, if somehow he flashes over the next 2 years, then maybe he hits the market when it's flush again.
Right. Well, the Ravens certainly have, I think, more to offer him than than most other teams in terms of what role he might have. And given that he could be Levine's replacement as the captain of special teams, which it's an honorary thing, but it's still kind of cool, I would think, if you're a player. And he might get that somewhere else too. But I'm looking at laying out the different possibilities of what will happen. I think a 1-year deal has only maybe a 25% chance of Board landing in Baltimore. I think there's probably about a 30% chance he goes somewhere else for a 1-year deal or 2. But I think the most likely thing is exactly what you said, is a 2-year deal in Baltimore, maybe 45% chance of that happening, I would think, because they've done it so many times with the exact same structure.
Same kind of guy.
Yeah, same kind of guy. A little bit of contribution on defense and a whole lot on special teams. Levine, McClellan, him, Gary Stills, all the same contract. All right, let's move on here. Jalen Ferguson is next. Obviously, trial by fire his rookie year, played fewer snaps this year, lost about 40% of his snaps, including some activations towards the end of the year, which was a little bit unusual. He lost some to Ward. Improved a lot as a run defender. Just in terms of your projection for him, obviously still only a second-year player. We don't really have to worry about the next contract just yet. But he sure is an important player to the Ravens in terms of their outside linebacker core.
Well, he's the only one under contract, so and obviously the Ngakoue trade changed a lot of things. Obviously, it made he and or Ward inactive. It was Ward initially, and then they switched back, and Ward played some pretty valuable snaps down the stretch. So. So yeah, I mean they gotta hope that, unfortunately they sometimes have these late blooming outside linebackers, edge guys that in their third and fourth years hit. So fingers crossed that he's one of them.
Yeah, the Paul Kruger mold,
yes.
or the even the Matthew Judon was kind of a late bloomer as well in terms
I
of.
mean, Zadarius Smith, McPhee,
Yes.
all of them were, they flashed a little in their first couple of years, but those third and fourth years, they really came into their own.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Okay, next one on the list, Malik Harrison. Now, Harrison played 27% of the snaps on the defense. Very run-heavy role for him. He's an early down player. If you look at the percentage of run versus pass snaps, he's very heavy towards the run side. He is by far the best tackler the Ravens have at linebacker. In fact, he's really the only good tackler they have at inside linebacker. Fort did not have a good year there this year, who we'll get onto. But another guy frequently targeted in coverage, really has not figured it out there in terms of specifically in terms of what's going on behind him. I think good downhill player. It would really be nice if he had been the first round pick and Queen had been the third round pick, because I don't think they'd be afraid to have Harrison playing the Mike role and Queen playing some sort of weak side role. But because they drafted him where they did, they almost feel like they had to give Queen the Mike role where he'd be on the field all the time.
Yeah, I mean it'll be interesting to see if that holds going forward. If it perhaps will next year, but maybe third year if if next year looks like this year, maybe they switch that. Obviously, it'll depend if Martindale's still here and what kind of defense they're running as well. Yeah, I mean it was I thought it was a solid third round pick when they got him. I was kind of surprised they took a second linebacker,
yes,
but
very surprised.
as it turns out, maybe they needed to. Maybe that so like two tight ends some years, and it works out. The second guy's better than the first guy, but maybe this is just another just different position. So yeah, but hopefully, I mean, again, pass coverage is always hard on a rookie, so hopefully that's something that that full off season makes a difference for.
Yeah, both of them. There's a lot of positional coaching needed, but those two inside linebackers could really benefit from it tremendously. The last guy on my developmental list is Broderick Washington. Now he's a tough one because he played only 15% of the snaps. It's a place where the Ravens certainly need youth, as we talked before. They drafted 2 defensive linemen. All their other guys are 30 plus. In fact, now I guess they're all 31 plus going into this next year. That's not a good place to be. And they have some big contracts there on the back end. We'll talk about Campbell and Williams, but it looks like they are likely to still be around. Wolf, they're talking about re-signing. I mean, that's a lot of money already spent on the defensive line where they'd really like to get younger.
Yeah, and hopefully Washington isn't a Dalen Mack from last year where now Mack, I don't think Mack even saw the field if I remember, or very rarely
8 snaps.
8 snaps. So at least in this case, Washington saw the field more. So they've always done well generally, Mack excluded perhaps, but with those later round big guys up there. I mean, obviously you're not going to get a huge pass rusher probably in there, but if you can get a solid run stuffer out of it, then that's something. This year they only have, well, depending upon maybe if David Culley gets the Houston job, then they'll get an additional third, but they're not swimming in picks this year at this point. I think they went into the last draft last year with 9 already in place, and I know they'll obviously trade down here and there and pick up some additional ones. So I mean, I think you hit it on the head. If hopefully the 2 that were drafted this year become something, and if they get another 4th or 5th or 6th that can hit next year, I don't know if they'll get somebody earlier than that again because of some of their other needs, and at this point not having a 3rd round pick.
So going to the draft, we hear about wide receiver. You hear about needing another tight end. You hear about needing an offensive lineman. There might even be people talking about getting a running back, and people talk about the skill position players a lot, obviously. But it's the defense, to me, that clearly needs more of a youth infusion than the offense. I mean, the offensive line has a lot of young choices already. That's a place where I could see them getting by with a 1-year vet on a kind of a low contract if they can bargain on. I'm not ever crazy about the free agent wide receiver train, but if you're going to do it, get a bargain this year, a 1-year bargain. Some guy who really thinks he's better than he is and is right, and we get him for 1 year. That'd be fantastic. I really don't want a big contract at wide receiver. And the place where I think the money needs to be spent in a lot of ways is on some of their homegrown talent that we're going to get to in this next category. And the very first name on our list of veterans playing for market value is Tyus Bowser, who's a free agent coming up. For my money, is one of the most important signees this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, he's another one of those guys that, started flashing a little 2 years ago, and then obviously this year played very well. I mean, he's never going to probably be a 10 sack guy, but he's going to do a lot of things really well. He's going to be an interesting, obviously, the Ravens, I mean, all the teams are, not in the greatest cap position given the drop in the cap if it drops to the 175. So, there are going to be a lot of those middle, perhaps free agents like Bowser that you might be able to get kind of a steal on, or give them a 1 or 2 year deal, pay them handsomely. There's ways of structuring these things with, dummy years in the contract. That you can spread out that bonus, and those years void, you have to deal with the cap consequences down the road, but your teams are going to have to be creative this year. And so are players and agents. So, he may have played his way out. I don't think he's played his way out as far as some of the others in the past couple of years. Your Darius Smiths and your Krugers, over the years. But, and this may be the year you can get him back on a steal deal.
It'd be nice. I mean, he's certainly one of those players you'd love to sign for a multi-year deal. Signing him for 1 year, it'd be okay, but honestly, I think it'd be much better if they could get him back on a mid-level contract for multiple years. Here's the problem. The Jets and New England are the two of the teams that have a lot of money to spend. And those two teams, the Jets are obviously very familiar with the Ravens personnel, so they're going to know Bowser. And New England loves this kind of outside linebacker. And if he doesn't end up in the AFC East, I'll be really shocked.
Right, that's true. And that's when we did this in the fall, we were talking about how we're going to re-sign Judon and Ngakwe, and we were complimenting Bowser, but it's become now it's more I personally think he'd be the priority over the others. One, because he's going to be cheaper.
At that price,
at a price. But I certainly don't. The other two are probably going to price their way out of Baltimore. And I don't. If Judon wants $20 million a year, I just don't see it. Now, the market may tell him he's not getting that.
Yeah.
A lot of guys aren't getting that, but so it's going to be a lot of interesting contracts out there.
Okay, so you've hit on a great point here. Is a player like Matthew Judon, where does he end up out of this? What is your guess? Can he get a 12 or 13 million average annual value over 4 years at this point right now?
I don't know, because he does a lot of things well, but if you want 20 million a year, you got to get to the quarterback 10 to 12 times a year, and so far that hasn't obviously been him. Now, it wasn't Darius Smith either, and Green Bay went way above where anybody thought. And actually, I can't say I've looked at his numbers this year. Were they about the same? Were they down? Were they up?
He didn't have as many sacks, but I'll look it up while you're talking.
So, but I think Judon is a more complete player than Zadarius Smith was when he was here, and probably even that he is in Green Bay. But so, I don't know. I mean, could he get 15? I don't know. He may be one of those guys. I mean, I remember, you and I go further back than a lot of Ravens fans, but, what year would it have been? 06, 05, 06, when we thought Bart Scott was going to get this big contract, and, and then he got a relatively modest, I think it was a 3-year deal. He was in Cleveland, and Billick called him up, or maybe it was Rex called him up and said, he called them. I think he called Ozzie, and he was about to sign, and he's about to agree to terms, and it's like, you know what, so, and that was a steal. I mean, that deal was an absolute steal. And of course, his next contract, he left, and
Rex came by his house at 12:05.
Rex did the John Cusack with the boombox outside from Say Anything, I think the movie is.
Don't know what you're talking about.
There were a lot of memes about that. It was a movie where John Cusack was trying to woo his girlfriend. He had a big boombox on his shoulder, and
Ken would have had to watch a movie instead of just Ravens football nonstop.
Right. So
no, actually, I did know. I didn't want to admit that I knew that was the.
So people, I remember people making pictures, all doing a photoshopping a boombox on Rex's shoulder, or boomboxing his face on John Cusack, I guess. So anyway, off that tangent. But so he may Judon loves it here, although his comments were kind of like, I think I'm gone, it sounded like to me. Mm-hmm. Whether that's his choice or he sees the writing on the wall, who knows. But of course he may think I'm getting 18 to 20 million a year, and the market may say you're getting 12 to 15, and the Ravens, as Ozzie always said, I'll make an offer, and you go shop it, and if you can get better elsewhere, good for you.
That's it. That's what really has to happen, I think, with all the players who are free agents, is just they need to have an opportunity to test the market. And that'll give the Ravens another chance to re-sign some of these guys, I think. And Ngakoue or Judon, I think it's one or the other, really fall into that category. I don't think either of them is going to get the kind of contract they would have gotten certainly last year. So the question is, can they get a multi-year deal that really is exciting enough to them that they really want to sign it, or do they want to sign a shorter-term deal with the Ravens, whether it's 1 year or two, and get to the end of the pandemic and a chance to re-sign again?
I mean, that would be an interesting question. We'll obviously never know, but what the Ravens had offered Judon last year on a long-term deal compared to what he will end up getting this year, and whether, I'm going to assume he's going to lose some money here.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's true of a lot of the players who are coming up for contracts this year. Okay, we've covered a couple of the players. Let's keep going here. Calais Campbell, not a lot to say. I don't think there's any chance for $5 million they're going to cut him. He's a terrific player and obviously a good teammate. Chuck Clark, the absolute captain of the defense, very central, very cheap. The Ravens really have a few of these guys who are extremely cheap in this veterans playing for market value. So market value is a broad term intended to say they're making a lot of money, but these guys, a lot of them are still tremendous values even at a lot of money.
Yeah.
So Clark with their mid-sized deal, is certainly in that group. Justin Ellis, not a big contract. He's one of the guys who may or may not have a job this next year, but he's also one of the guys, I think, who could be re-signed relatively cheaply.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically playing on one of these veteran salary benefit deals, used to be called minimum salary benefit deals before last year's CBA. It reduces the base salary for cap purposes, so he gets paid like a veteran, but he's on the cap for basically a player that has 2 years of service. So I would think, he played sparingly, but when they needed him, he gave them some decent snaps. So I would think he's a guy. I don't think he's that old either.
He's over 30.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but for defensive linemen, that's not usually, especially a run stuffer kind of guy. So I mean, he's not going to be a guy they're going to sign, anytime soon, and it maybe not even until after the draft. But he's certainly a guy I think they could bring back, and there's going to be very little guaranteed money. So if he's not amongst the top 53, then sayonara.
I think L.J. Ford had a really good year last year. He played the best, I can say, without question, of any of the Ravens' inside linebackers. It's not a tremendously impressive group, but L.J. Ford was the best of the group in terms of pretty much every aspect, with the exception, I think, that Harrison is a little bit better tackler. But Ford is a guy that now I look at his contract and what he's going to make next year. Is there any chance he gets cut?
I don't think so, and that's I'm not certainly 100% in that. There's 2.5 or 2.25 million in cap savings if he's not here, so it's not a huge amount, but they're going to have to find cap space from here, there, and everywhere. So if he's gone and you replace him, you're basically replacing him with somebody. Even a rookie is going to be close to 700,000. So you're reducing that down to about $1.5 million. So I think a lot of it will depend on how they feel about Queen and Harrison, and if they feel if they feel they can maybe draft a linebacker in the fifth who can be that guy for roughly 700,000 that makes the difference, or if Board can step into that role. And if they get Board back on a cheaper deal, like we were talking.
It'll be interesting. Fort does not have a lot of tread wear, even though he's getting up there now in terms of age. But I don't see any reason why after this season, Fort could not fall into the perpetual 2-year deal mode for the Ravens in terms of a guy who contributes on defense and is a top special teams player. Definitely could be a spot for him. And I'm thinking back to that first Cleveland game where he and Levine just sniffed out that fake punt right away before it even happened. It's beautiful to see it pays to have some veterans on the field just to sniff that kind of stuff out.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And obviously he gives that bonus to special teams as well. So I would be surprised, but again, they're going to restructure a lot of contracts they wouldn't have restructured otherwise. Even if it only means saving $1 million, on some of these, Tucker they can do, and it's like it's only $1 million. Doesn't change the cap numbers in the future that much either, so that's fine. But it's not going to save a lot. But they're going to have to do that with guys just to get some working cash, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Marlon Humphrey, not a lot to say. Obviously, he'll be here for a long time. Came through big time on his. On this year, and now will be signed for 5 more, correct? He's signed through 2025, correct?
Yeah, it's six more.
I think 6 more.
Because it was a 5-year extension, but he had 2 years left. He had this year and one more in his option year, and it was a 5-year extension. It's 6 more.
Very good. Okay, so we hope for the best, and he certainly has come through on the initial part of it. Matthew Judon, we talked a little bit about. Anthony Levine has been in discussions here. Lost his dime roll. It may have been injury-related this year because the Ravens really were struggling without a legitimate dime back this year. Having Board on the field was nowhere near as good as what they've had there with Clark in 2019, with Levine in 2018, and with Levine in 2017. It was sad to see him not out there. I think it was injury related. Maybe he can get it back. If he doesn't, they have some other options at safety who I hope will come through. Do you think Anthony Levine could be done in Baltimore?
I mean, a lot of these guys, it's going to be I'm going to take a minimum deal. He's been paid above the minimum slightly. I don't think. He's going to get more than the minimum. So if the Ravens want him back, is he going to really want to go somewhere else? He spent his whole career here. He's part of that. There's another new cap rule from last year's CBA, the 4-year qualifying player, which means you're a free agent and you've been on the team for at least 4 straight years without interruption, which again kind of acts as that veteran salary benefit where they can get a bigger bonus than the veteran salary benefit, but they still get the reduced salary. But I'm not sure he's going to get a lot of signing bonus because again the market's going to dictate that nobody's going to give him more than a very small bonus and a minimum deal. So a lot of players like that. Why would I go somewhere else? If they want me back here, I've been my whole career here. So I think there's probably a decent chance he's back if there's room.
Yeah.
But if he just doesn't if he's one of those guys, when it comes time to cut down to 53, he's not going to get such a signing bonus. It's going to be, we can't cut him because we've wasted money.
Right.
At that point, if he's not amongst the 53, then he goes.
Yes, yeah. So he could have 25, 50,000 guaranteed at that point, and that might be it, and they'd be okay with that. In the case of him, to me, it hinges on whether or not he can play defense or not. If he's only a special teams guy, I think the Ravens are rich with guys who could take over as defensive captain, who have some of his instincts and whatnot. To me, it's can he get back to that dime back role because it was so key in terms of what value he provided the Ravens. All right, let's move on. Pernell McPhee is the next guy. We talked about him the last time as a guy who could be another Raven for as long as he wants to be a Raven at a little bit more than the minimum salary. But he's a guy who, again, can play, for that veteran benefit salary. And what's the maximum he can earn on that and still cost the Ravens the minimum?
It's 137.5, I believe, is the max bonus. I'm trying to think. Last year, remember, he was coming off of the injury, so he did not even. He got a lesser deal last year than he got the prior year. Now this year he stayed healthy and obviously contributed. So that may be something that they handle a little differently. I heard one of the fan yesterday afternoon, I think it was. They were talking about giving him a deal of $2 or $3 million, and I'm like, I don't see. No offense to Burnett, I love him. I mean, I think he's perfect fit for the role they have him in. But I was kind of shocked by that. I thought that was way over the top. But I'm trying to find him. I think he only made. Well, he had the veteran salary of $1 million, but I mean his cap number was under 900,000. So I mean that was the veteran salary benefit. So I would think he would be back. I mean he's another guy. Again, do I want to go somewhere else? I'm not going to get paid. If I go somewhere else, I'm going to get paid much more. Is 50,000 more somewhere else better than staying here where I'm comfortable? And so I would think he's going to be back. Obviously, it all depends on what happens in the draft and free agency and things like that. But especially because right now they may lose 3 of their top guys so in free agency. So then you got Ferguson, you bring him back, you go to the draft or somewhere else. So
if you look at that, the only fear I have is that players like McPhee, who are at kind of the bargain level and everybody knows that they maybe have something to add, but you're still taking a gamble. Maybe Ward falls into this category as well, will be in slightly more demand in a year like this where cap space is very tight. So you end up with everybody's bargain hunting because nobody can afford the Judon, the Bowser, the Ngakoue. That you end up with a lot of marginal demand, incremental marginal demand for guys who are towards the lower end of the salary structure.
No, I think you're right. It's that sort of it's a little different numbers, but it's the Bisciotti. Why pay the top of the market for a guy who, and I can get the 80-20 thing, I think he called it. Where I can, get 80% of it for 20% of the value, or whatever his numbers were. So you might be right with that. That may be, area where teams are like, well, I can't spend a lot. So but this is a guy I think can contribute for that amount.
So McPhee, interestingly, had 448 snaps this year. The Ravens, and that's excluding penalties, so he'd be up in the high 400s if you included those. With him on the field, the Ravens allowed 4.9 yards per play. Without him on the field, 5.4 yards per play. Now, he moved to more of a run roll, but boy, did the Ravens need him as an edge setter, and did he look great in the game against Tennessee in that role. McPhee is so valuable and so versatile, they actually have trouble apportioning out his snaps to keep him at any kind of a reasonable limit.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously the year before he played. I mean, they the whole time they've been saying they wanted to limit him, but and I think he was playing pretty much full games that year until he got hurt. So, I mean, I just think he's the kind of guy that just fits in well here, and hopefully he can be back. I guess at least that's my perspective.
We've talked a little bit about Ngakoue. Let's talk about Marcus Peters because he's kind of an interesting one. He's got, a kind of a team-friendly structure to the contract in terms of it having not a lot of guaranteed money, and he's in a better place if the Ravens wanted to cut him either this year or next. They could do it. They're not going to cut him this year, I'm pretty sure. But what do you think about the contract structure itself?
Yeah, I mean, it was obvious it was a shorter-term deal when they had him sign it, and he was certainly having a rebirth, when he signed. So, but what they did was they guaranteed, as opposed to giving him a big bonus. I mean, it was an $8 million bonus, but they guaranteed pretty much everything. So the money he got in the first year, at the end of that year, and then last year, basically his base salary had a roster bonus, so they guaranteed $13 million there. So that is, in my opinion, I think that was a good sign because now they.
We're having some technical difficulties here. I'm sorry.
We good?
I think so. Josh, are we okay on technically there?
Yeah, we should be fine. Brian dropped out for a little bit, but looks like
Oh.
you're back now.
I may have hit my headphone jack. So,
Well, it was like your internet dropped out for a moment.
oh, okay.
Video,
That's what it looked like.
yeah, video kind of slowed down and everything. So I think we're good right now.
Okay, so yeah, so what they did, and I hope that's well, obviously this year is not going to be the year to do it, but in the future, guaranteeing those salaries, those first couple year salaries, and giving the smaller bonus, so when you get to years, 4, 5, and 6, you can get out from under them, but the players still paid handsomely. So. Peters is an interesting character and he's an interesting character in general, I guess.
Yes.
But there's always a release that comes out of nowhere. And if there's one, that's the one, because it's close to 10 million in cap savings there. And there's no, as you said, there's no guaranteed money. It's just 4 million in dead money. I would be surprised. But again, there always seems to be one of those holy cow ones. And as you mentioned, if Averett, if they feel Averett's ready, and obviously they've already brought Smith back, and if they feel comfortable, obviously you can't feel comfortable with Tavon Young's health, but if they
could draft a corner.
Well, right, or you go out and get probably a veteran for a decent price on the market that is you're still gonna save the money from Peters. So, not saying it's gonna happen, but. This year is the year they're going to have to find cap space, and when you can find 10 million from one guy, and his play did come down from the year before.
I agree with that, and that's why I think he's really playing for next year's contract this year. But he's still awfully good.
I agree.
Individually.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm not expecting it, but you're probably more of a chance that they restructure the deal. Or extend it with perhaps some dummy years that can spread out the restructure, and then they have to deal with some of that extra money, not next year, but the year after.
Do you think that the Ravens could go to Peters and say, "Hey, we want to drop your salary to $8 million this next year"? What would they have to offer in exchange for that to happen? I'm not talking about any kind of a restructuring necessarily, but if they offered him $8 million and guaranteed 25% of 2022, do you think he would take that?
You would have to be something. He would have to make sure that 2022 was worth it, obviously. But you could do that, and I think you're going to see a few of those. Or again, I'm a big proponent of dummy years this time around. I've never be that in the past, but you can save. Nick Boyle's like the perfect one to me to do it, because Harbaugh seems to is speaking like he's going to be around, but that 5.5 million again looks pretty enticing.
Big number.
So you can take that, drop it down to 1.5, give him a $4 million bonus, add three dummy years onto the deal. So you save $3 million this year. You'd have to pay that next year on the cap, which obviously, fingers crossed that everything's back to normal. So you got to be careful there. But that way you're not getting into a terrible extension. Locking yourself into a terrible extension. So those are kind of things. Now, granted, that's what the Saints did with Breeze year after year after year after year, and you see where it got them. So it's not something you want to do, a lot of. But unfortunately, this year you're going to have to make some decisions you don't want to have to make, and that may be the kind of deal. And Peters might be a good example of that too.
I wouldn't be opposed to it if the Ravens could set themselves a budget internally and stick to it if they thought it was reasonable. Like maybe restructuring $15 million is reasonable in a year the cap drops to 175, but you need that money later. I mean, Andrews, Brown, Jackson, all those guys got to get re-signed. We're probably not going to re-sign all of them.
No, but every team is going through the same thing. So it's not like, in past years when they were restructuring deals, and there were teams out there that had, a ton of teams out there that had 50 million in space. That was problems, because then you couldn't go and compete with them for players. But the Ravens are actually, but for the pandemic, would be one of those teams with 50 million right now. They'd be, they're in middle of the pack right now. But they would, they would have plenty of cap space. I mean, this was, last year and this year and next year, whether Jackson gets a deal or, if he gets his deal this year, then it'll be a smaller number for the next couple of years still. These were the gravy years, and, unfortunately, here we are.
Yeah. I did look at the over the cap numbers, and the Ravens were around 14 and change in total cap space. That if you add up all of the net cap across the entire NFL, it's only about 49 million and change. So the Ravens own about 29% of the total cap space in the entire league. Now, that's just one way to look at it, because obviously there's a bunch of forced purges, the Eagles, the Saints, leading the charge, who are going to have to give a total between them of almost 200 million. And okay. Anyway, who else we got? Jordan Richards, probably not worth a discussion here, but he's a problem to me because he doesn't really contribute a lot on defense, even though he's a good special teams player. Jimmy Smith re-signed. Jihad Ward, interesting one, outside linebacker, maybe in the same group as McPhee in terms of a guy they'd like to get back if the price is right.
Yeah, I would think so. Now, obviously, he made it clear that he wasn't very happy in midseason when he was inactive. Whether he was going to look and say, I want to try somewhere else now because of that, or whether being active at the end and playing well is enough for him to soften his stance, or the Ravens to say, we'll bring it back. But again, he's another veteran, minimum salary guy. I mean, nobody's other than maybe a little more. But when you're talking about, are you going to give him? Is he going to get 50K from somebody or 100K from somebody? As a bonus. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're not looking at it. Is he going to get an extra $1 million from somebody else? I would be surprised at things like that. So
right. Won't be a chart-breaking number. No. And I think, to me, the key thing is I see the Ravens only having 5 outside linebackers next year, not 6. So I mean, they got themselves in a position where they weren't getting enough production, and they went out and got Yannick Ngakoue. Mm-hmm. Well, that gave them 6. Right. To deal with. Sure. But when they had 5, the snaps were available, the active game day spots were available, and it wasn't a problem. So last couple guys on the list, Brandon Williams and Derek Wolfe, both on the defensive line. Derek Wolfe, give me a probability that he'll be re-signed.
If this was a full cap year, I'd say absolutely. I would say 85%. I mean, because you just never know, somebody might come along and blow you away.
Best price me on the price for a 2-year deal. Best guess.
Well, let's see. He played $3 million this year. He played. I think he only missed a game or 2. So I'm thinking about how you could build incentives in.
I'll give you a percentage of snaps. Was 58.3, which is damn high for a defensive lineman. Right. By far led the Ravens.
Right. So any incentive that wouldn't count this year would have to be 60% of snaps, which is, again, in his career.
Oh, just to be clear, that makes it qualify for NLTVE.
Right, so it would not count this year. So if he reaches it, then again it gets paid in 2022. So that's a way of getting him more money. But that's, as you said already, that's a high snap count to start with. Sacks could be. He didn't have a lot of sacks, right?
No, so they could do it. They could do it based on that. What did he have? About 3 sacks or something?
That, yeah. So they could do 4, and they could do 5 sacks or 4 sacks. I mean, because in his career he was a guy who got sacks at times. So, so I would think you're looking at that $3 million, $2.5 to $3 million per year kind of number. Mm-hmm. Because again, guys just got to take pay cuts. It's just that simple, Right. So he can't go in and say, look, I played well last year and I made 3, so I should make 4 this year. It's just, you can't make that argument. Normal cap years, you can make that argument, but you can't do that now.
One sack for Wolfe this year. He did have 1 additional in the postseason at Tennessee.
So they could easily build some incentives in there. $100,000 for 3 sacks, another $100,000, or something like that for 5, or something like that. Even more, But so they could certainly do things like that.
Breaking news coming across. Josh Soroka is reporting.
All right, I thought we were going to save this for the mailbag, but we
can
jump in right now.
No, we want to hear this right now.
So ESPN is now reporting that the Texans are hiring David Culley.
Oh my God, that's a huge windfall for the Ravens.
That's crazy.
How could he be on the radar? I mean, we hear nothing but beating up on the Ravens passing game. He's the passing game coordinator.
Yeah.
He gets hired by the Texans, and the Ravens are going to get 2 third-round picks, one in each of the next 2 years. We will do a virtual high five here, Brian, on that one, because that's unbelievable.
I mean, he sounds like he's a really good guy and a really good coach. I understand the obvious limitations of our passing game, but there's a guy for the Texans who I know pretty well who does the same thing I do. Mm-hmm. And oh my God, he's got to be beside himself. I mean, they already are, obviously, but I don't know how Culley solves their Deshaun Watson problem. I mean, I don't know that anybody could, apparently, but wow, it's going to be a fun year with fun off season with the quarterbacks, that's for sure. But, wow.
And he's got to be a leader of men. I think they must have seen that in him, the way they saw Harbaugh. I mean, who would have thought that Harbaugh would be hired?
Right, and I think that's how he's been described. But wow.
That's great news. Great news.
What happened to the trend of like going after all the young guys? He's not a young guy.
No. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it could have been that it seemed like the young guys were out of the picture there. So maybe a lot of the young guys there, given the dysfunction, were like, I'm not. But because the last two were Culley and Leslie Frazier. And Leslie Frazier's not a spring chicken either, so I'm guessing that's probably what happened is the dysfunction there. They're like, the top candidates are like, I'm not interested.
It might not be that. It might be that they really trust him to build a coaching structure at his age. I mean, a lot of the younger coaches do kind of have a chip on their shoulder, and they want all young guys beneath them that they can move around. Or maybe they want old professional guys, but you end up with this barbelling of a lot of Coach Joe D's,
right,
who are very technical and good, but you also end up with a lot of young guys that you fit into that clique, and you're not hiring from the whole field the way you should be if you're the Ravens, or maybe if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you have people who are strong at the top and are secure in their own hiring.
Yeah. So and I like I said, you mentioned it does sound like he's a guy that is a good leader, and that I think that's probably maybe more of what they need than he may have come in and said, this is who I'm they talk about their staff, this is who I'm bringing in, this is who I want, and they like the people, they like the offensive coordinator. I mean, James Urban could be gone now. I mean, I know he was. Did he interview in Jacksonville, or he interviewed somewhere for offensive coordinator? And obviously that could be, back to the drawing board, because I think he was a good one.
Yeah, he's a very good influence on Lamar. It'd be sad to lose him. If I were Urban, being an OC as opposed to being Lamar's quarterback coach, it's awfully nice to be the caddy to a longtime star in the NFL.
Right, and it gives you, if Roman were to get a job somewhere next year, you step right up, and then that makes it easier. Well, although going to be Deshaun Watson's OC is probably not a bad thing either.
There you go.
But yeah, I agree with you. But that's good to hit your wagon too. He's a good guy to hit your wagon to too, for sure.
All right, you got sidetracked a little bit like that. Let's get back to the list here. Brandon Williams, any chance the Ravens look at his number and say, we can't afford it?
Normally, again, I keep saying this about everybody. Normally, I would say if the cap was where it's supposed to be, I would say they'd be fine. But there's $7.5 million in cap savings there. They love him, obviously. They would not want to see him go. Whether he's a short-term extension kind of guy or a dummy years kind of extension kind of guy is possibility. He already took a pay cut last year. So...
Was that more of a restructure?
Well,
or was it really a cut?
I think if I remember correctly, he cut. It was a $2 or $3 million cut over the 2 years. So it was a little in cash this year. His cap number's the same this year. So that's what it was. So he took a $2 million pay cut this year. His cap number is the same because of the bonus they gave him last year added the $2 million back to his cap number. He does have smart by his agent, he has a roster bonus due early in the league year, which basically forces the Ravens to pay him then or cut him before that. So that should be resolved pretty early.
Fifth day of the league year? What, is it one of those? Or
I
is
think it's fifth day. Yeah.
Okay.
So and usually when it's fifth day, they don't wait that long. Now, would they go back to them and say we need another million or two? Because there's not going to be money on the market, or again, we'll extend your deal a year, and then we'll guarantee part of next year. Mm-hmm. So even if we cut you next year, you're getting the money you're perhaps losing this year, you'll get it next year. And if you're not here, then you still get it, or we trade you or something, but one way or another, you're going to get it from us. So, I mean, that's a possibility as well. So, I don't see it, but I just don't see where they're going to need cap space, and they're just going to have to find it somewhere.
Okay, Brian, I can only do this with people like you because you immediately get this kind of question, okay? It's the third day of the league year, and the Ravens have made a surprise cut, but you don't know who it is. And the four possibilities are Brandon Williams, Calais Campbell, Marcus Peters, and Nick Boyle. Assign me a percentage chance to each of those four.
I would say Campbell would be the least likely. Mm-hmm. Because of the $10 million in dead money for the $5 million savings, it doesn't make sense to me. So we'll go with that's a 15% chance.
15.
15.
Okay. Keep going.
Never know. I mean, never say never. So it's probably 10, but I'll go with 15.
Okay. You can adjust.
Yeah. I'm probably gonna have to.
Boyle, Williams, and Peters.
I say Boyle is the most likely.
50 of those.
Of those, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to go back. So Campbell's gonna have to go down to 10%.
Okay.
So that's 60. So that's 20, and so it's 20 and 20.
You get a 25 and a 15 left, or two 20s.
Yeah. So Peters and Williams. I'll say. Here I'm gonna even more finer. 22 Williams, 18 Peters.
22 Williams, 18 Peters. There you go. Okay. So that's directly from the mouth of Brian McFarland. Surprise cut, 50% chance to be Boyle, 22% Williams, 18 Peters, 10 Campbell.
Oh, sorry, my headphones jack is to me again, but I'm back. Am I back?
All right, very good. We want to get a little bit deeper into this. Tavon Young is the one veteran cap value concern. Tavon could come back and be great, but he's going to be a cap value concern no matter what in 2022 when he's back to his full salary again. He only took effectively a 1-year pay cut.
Yeah, so I mean that was a good deal for both. He took a pay cut. He got the guaranteed salary this year, which makes it very unlikely they would cut him. Because otherwise, if he didn't, he would be cut. I don't think there's, at this point, when we had that conversation, we were basically saying he and Ingram were the guys that were certainly looking like they were getting cut. So I think that's right on. If wherever, he's playing for that next year, and he may not even get that next year, but again, if he plays really well, then maybe they look to extend that and spread that out a little. It was a good deal for him, and just again, fingers crossed, because when he's healthy, he's darn good.
He's a hell of a player when he's healthy, that's for sure. So I'm going back to Anthony Averett for a second, or maybe a young draftee, or who the Ravens draft, and look at the cornerback situation, which seems tremendously deep. It includes Tavon Young, who's obviously a cap value concern, but also an injury concern. Marcus Peters, who's a value concern really, but is playing at a high level currently. It includes Jimmy Smith, who every year Ravens fans predict will be his last, and I've been right in that category, predicting that he would not be re-signed. But it just seems like if you're Anthony Averett, a lot of things would have to go wrong for you not to get an opportunity here in Baltimore.
Well, that's true, because as we've said, it always seems like every year, last couple of years certainly, we felt very deep, and it hasn't turned out that way. I mean, heck, 2 years ago they went out and got Peters because of the problems they were having. So but yeah, I think Averett, it's going to be a big year for him, because if he does get that chance, if he can, he can show it, then wow, he can hit that market next year when it should be a full cap. Hopefully, again, fingers crossed.
All right. Now, in the transitional category, I've got 13 players. I'm just going to read them off, and I want you to tell me who you think might still be a player out of this group. But Aaron Adoye, Otaro Olako, Terrell Bonds, Aaron Crawford, Pierre Desir, Khalil Dorsey, Braxton Hoyt, Jaron Curse, who people thought would be here, but he's actually a free agent, so is Desir. Iman Marshall, Chauncey Rivers, Nigel Warrior, Christian Welch, and Chris Westry. Most of these guys did play some in 2020 just because of COVID and everybody getting called up for the one game. Who on that list do you think might be a contributor for the 2021 Ravens?
Well, I mean, Marshall, just because he's a corner. Obviously, we haven't seen him in 2 years, but he was a draftee and a corner. They obviously thought enough of him drafting him. I believe he's a fourth rounder, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
So,
but he's entering year 3, so that option has declined in value terrifically.
But, as far as, if he plays well, if he has good OTAs and things like that, then at least he makes the roster. And, as we said, who knows if he gets a chance to play or not. For the future, I mean, none of them really. But, I mean, the one I think they really liked, Aaron Crawford. I don't know how did he see many snaps in the game he was active?
Yeah, he played something like 18 snaps against Pittsburgh. Actually, I don't think it was Pittsburgh he was active against. It was a different game.
I think it was Pittsburgh was the one that everybody was active. So
yeah. But I want to say it was a different game, and I'm gonna have trouble finding it the way my data is set up here. But let me see if I can just check the Pittsburgh game and see if that was it. Yeah, he played 18 snaps against Pittsburgh in the second game, and they played better with him on the field for whatever that means. But I thought he looked very good in that game, and I was upset with all the times they'd gone with 4 defensive linemen when it would really hurt them, like against Tennessee,
right.
And I think against New England as well. They did the same thing.
Yeah, so I mean, and they have a good history of finding those, defensive tackles in undrafted guys that aren't necessarily going to be superstars, but are going to give you some quality minutes. And as you said, they need to get young at the position. So he would seemingly be a guy who would, because most of these guys are probably not even pushing for a roster spot next year. Really pushing. I mean, obviously Welsh was on the roster for half the year. But I'm not sure as a defender, he wasn't really here to be a defender. He's here to be special teams and be depth. But I think Crawford probably of those guys. I don't really know much. Some of the other guys that were on the practice squad, because again we didn't get to see preseason, so we didn't get a really good look at them. But those would be I guess Crawford and Marshall probably the two most likely to be on the roster next year.
All right, the guys I've got Welch included in the group and Crawford, but the other two guys I think who have a chance, just because I want the Ravens to go back to dime. So maybe I'm projecting that I want this. Are Nigel Warrior, who apparently has had some practice issues and whatnot, and I don't mean ethically, I mean in terms of understanding where he's supposed to be on the field, which is obviously a problem. But the other guy, they just brought in this Chris Westry, who looks like a comp for Jaron Curse. He's a 6'4" safety. So one of these massive guys who, just screams dime back to me. Maybe either he or Curse would come back. Curse is a lower probability because he can sign anywhere, of course.
Right, and he's a veteran, so that's why most of the veterans that were on the practice squad weren't re-signed because of, one, they're going to cost more, and two, they want to kind of look around, and they're guys you can get later. So, once those guys and Bonds obviously. That was a little surprising. I mean, granted, he was going to be low on the totem pole here with all the other corners we've mentioned, but I was surprised when he wasn't signed, and he just signed with Miami yesterday, the day before.
He did.
Yeah.
I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, he just did.
Okay.
They got a future deal there, so he obviously didn't. Even though he got some minutes here, I guess he figured, with Smith back and Dorsey was ahead of him. Even earlier in the year, Dorsey was the one who got called up, so. Dorsey's ahead of him. Marshall comes back. Tavon Young comes back. So what is that to put him like 8th in line or something? So I guess that's why he thought that, I'm assuming it was his decision to go elsewhere.
Right. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, we're gonna hold off on the mailbag until after the offensive show. But Brian, I just want to thank you again. It is such a pleasure to talk about this with you every time we do it. It doesn't always feel like a completely new show, and yet, I'm sorry, it isn't always a completely new show, but it feels like a completely new show because it's always a fun conversation to have. And to have this, the Cully deal strike while we're on air, that's a lot of fun.
And by now, everyone else has gone ahead and confirmed it. So it's not just ESPN.
Yes.
Wow.
Right.
I'll be curious. Well, we maybe should do this on the next part, or should we finish it here? I'll be curious to see how these third round picks work, because there are going to be a lot of them.
They'll be after comp.
I assume the comps will come first, and so they'll be lower on the third. And I mean, there's already 3. This is probably the 4th one now.
Really?
Well, let's see. San Francisco got one for the Jets coach.
Salah.
Yeah, Salah. Let's see, Jacksonville didn't. Detroit didn't. Oh well, you get them for GMs too.
Okay.
So the couple I think the others were all from may have been from GMs. I'll have to look those up, but
the Texans have a new GM.
They do, but that was the guy from New England, so it's not them. I'm trying to think, but I'll try to look that up.
Yep. We'll come back to it. Yep. Josh will look it up for us, in fact. Brian, before we go, tell people where they can find your stuff, and on Twitter, follow you and whatnot.
Sure. So on Twitter, I'm at Raven Salary Cap. This is my busy time. It'll probably slow down over the next month or so, but then by late February, actually, I guess we're almost February, so it's not a month or so anymore. So, things will pick up, and then free agency starts on March 17th. So that's the big time, and obviously figuring out, once we know what the cap exactly is going to be, whether it's going to be 175 or higher, hopefully. Obviously benefits everybody, but I think everybody would prefer a higher cap when we talk about these things. And then obviously my stories at Russell Street Report. My big story just was last week, and that's the preview, which will be updated periodically as we get closer. And as signings happen, as soon as I know the details, they're on Twitter, and then there's an article.
Well, I'll say a couple of things. First of all, if you're not following at Raven Salary Cap, make sure you do it. Second of all, tag him on all salary cap questions. Don't ask me. I'm just going to tag him. And particularly if it's not something that's in a very base understanding of the thing, there I'll probably be okay. But if it's something, any kind of nuance to it at all, any kind of difficulty of question above a third grade cap level question, make sure you have at Raven Salary Cap tagged to that. And Brian is very good about responding, even though he's a busy lawyer himself. Appreciate having you on, Brian.
Thanks.
And we'll
Absolutely.
talk to you next time.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Talk to you next time on Film Study.